Welcome to the Horror Next Door. This is all the horror movies we watched in January 2024. Links to our Letterboxd accounts are in the description box below. If you like this video, would you kindly subscribe?
Slotherhouse from 2023, which was watched on Hulu. When you make the decision to watch a film about a killer sloth, you're making a very specific decision, and your expectations had better not be too high. That being said, although this movie was enjoyable because of the sloth, it was only enjoyable because of the sloth. The rest of the plot and characters were honestly just annoying and absurd and not likable at all. The good thing about that is that you are rooting for the sloth the entire time. The bad thing about that is when they start fighting back against the sloth, at least for me, because I really didn't want to see anything bad happen to that cute little sloth. I think the sorority setting was a funny choice. They made a lot of really good puns and jokes related to it. You would know immediately whether or not this movie is going to be for you. I think I was a little bit annoyed by some of the social media references and things, but I guess I just think about how some horror films from the 80s, 90s feel timeless still. And I think about in the future, movies that rely on social media references this heavily, how poorly that is going to age. I think it was too long, and I think they shifted focus off of the sloth for way too much of that runtime. Regardless, it is a fun time. If you can accept the fact that this is literally about a sloth that kills people, and that sounds like something you're into, then I do recommend it.
If you've been keeping up with our What We Watched videos, you'll know that we watched a movie a few months back called Killer Sofa. Honestly, I kind of compared this with Killer Sofa, but although we were disappointed with Killer Sofa, and I feel like we were kind of disappointed with Slotherhouse, I actually kind of think Slotherhouse was a little bit better, only in the sense of it didn't have too much of a ridiculous storyline to have a reason for there being something killing people that doesn't usually kill people, like a sofa or a sloth. The other reason why I think this movie is probably just one step better than Killer Sofa is just the fact that all the shots with the sloth are ridiculously funny. The little animatronic puppet thing that they made looks ridiculous, but it also looks cute at the same time. You can tell it's a puppet, which is not that big of a deal, but it's just funny seeing the sloth in random situations offing these people. Some of the complaints that we had with Killer Sofa was there wasn't enough slasher elements to the movie. And that was one of my big complaints with Slotherhouse, is this big detour in the movie where they're just going on and on and on about the sorority and all this stuff. And it's like, can we get back to the slasher aspect of this movie? Like, is this movie a horror movie or is this something else? Because at some points it goes really long gaps without any slasher elements. The other thing would be the fact that there are a lot of deaths in the movie that are off camera. We just want to have a fun slasher movie like Friday the 13th, for example, just with a sloth. I don't understand what's so hard to do here. And even with Killer Sofa, it's like, can we just have something like Friday the 13th or Halloween with a sofa killing people? Like, that's what I was getting myself into. And that's what I was getting myself into with this. There's just these long gaps of pointless stuff. And then when you finally do get to a kill, it cuts and we don't get to see anything. Come on. It's 2024 or 2023 when this movie was released. Let's have some gore. Let's have some fun with it. The other thing I found interesting about this movie is the poster has the sorority house on there. And first of all, the sorority house in the movie looks nothing like the sorority house in the poster. But also, the sorority house in the poster looks very identical to the Hewitt family house in the remake Texas Chainsaw Massacre series. I will put them up on the screen there so you can look at them. They're the same house, if you ask me, but it doesn't look anything like that in the movie. And I remember before we turned it on, I was like, I'm pretty sure that's the remake Texas Chainsaw Massacre house. And if it is, if you remember in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies, that house is in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing around it. And I was kind of curious how that was going to impact the film at all. But then when we get into the movie, they're just in a completely different sorority house. So that was kind of a letdown. Who knows? The filmmakers probably have nothing to do with this poster. I would recommend this movie to people who just like ridiculous horror films or just comedy in their horror. You'll probably love this movie as long as you can take the fact that there's not an abundance of slasher to it or gore for that matter. If you can get past that, you'll probably really enjoy this. But if you don't like this ridiculous humor in your horror, then you're probably not going to like it, and I wouldn't recommend it to you.
Entrance from 2012, which was watched on Tubi. I have already seen and talked about this film in a prior What We Watched video. I was just scrolling along Tubi and saw it and decided I felt like watching it again. I feel like there is a tension and an intensity that runs throughout this entire film. I think it is extremely well done. I do very highly recommend it, with one little caveat, which is it's not like a slasher film or something where there's constant blood and gore and jump scares and excitement. It's a lot more toned down, and you do have to be a little patient. But one of the reasons I did want to watch it again was because once you know everything that happens at the end of the film, watching it again is very interesting because you find a lot of little things that you may have missed upon your first viewing. Horror House on Highway 6 from 2014, which was watched on Tubi. This movie came up because I was actually searching for Elvis Presley movies, and when I typed in Elvis, it came up because the synopsis of this film claims that there's a crazy person who's obsessed with Elvis and doing experiments on people in their basement or something along those lines. When I looked this movie up on Letterboxd, people were talking about how Horror House on Highway 5 was an 80s film that was wacky and over the top and crazy, and they loved it, and whoa, I can't believe there's a sequel, especially this long later. As someone who's never seen the original and has no background on this director or affinity that people who have seen the original may have, I didn't really like this movie. There were things about it that I liked. I liked one of the actresses. I thought she kind of carried the movie. I apologize for not taking the time to look it up, but she was one of the main characters. I'm sure if you decide to watch this, you'll know who I'm talking about. I think the Elvis thing was definitely something that they used in the synopsis to grab people's attention. Elvis Presley is a legend who has a lot of fans, and I didn't really get that feeling from this. They were like, oh wow, look at this huge Elvis collection this Elvis fanatic has. It was like 4 or 5 things on some shelves in a corner. I'm all, okay, that's not really a fanatic behavior or collection, but whatever. It was just a little bit too wonky and all over the place for me. All of a sudden there was this more than one timeline thing going on, and more than anything, I guess it was just confusing. Maybe if I had been paying full attention, if I was engaged enough, I would have understood everything and I would have enjoyed it more. As it is, I lost interest pretty quickly, to be honest. So I can't really personally recommend it, but I also don't know if I gave it a fair shake, especially considering how much I usually do like wonky, low budget, so bad it's good type stuff. But it is what it is. Finders Keepers from 2014, which was also watched on Tubi. This was the result of scrolling around when you really don't know what to watch. The cover just looked ridiculous. The synopsis states that there's like an evil possessed doll involved, and this doll on the cover is one of the ugliest freaking things. I don't know why any parent whose child found this doll would let them keep it just based on the way it looks alone. Tobin Bell is in this. I really don't understand why. It is one of the most generic, cliche, poorly done horror films I've ever seen in my life. I'm honestly not sure what anyone in this movie wanted to do with it. I never claimed to be a Jamie Presley fan or anything, but I think this was below her as a role to take. I really don't want to be mean, but there's no way I could talk about this movie without making a comment about her haircut. It is one of the most unflattering, horrible haircuts I've ever seen. I just feel like she probably wishes this movie doesn't even exist, and I do too. I do not recommend this movie. The only way I could recommend this for a one-time watch is if you want to predict everything, and then some of the things that happen, the way they're executed, or some of the dialogue or some of the actions the character take are just unintentionally hilarious. So that would be the only reason to check this out. Definitely not a so bad it's good, just plain bad. Dr. Sleep from 2019, which was watched on Blu-ray. Watched the director's cut, which is long, but it doesn't feel long at all. I think this movie's amazing. Because I rewatched The Shining recently, I just really felt like seeing this again. There's no need to talk about it because we've mentioned it multiple times in prior What We Watched videos. In our last What We Watched, I mentioned that The Shining is probably my all-time favorite movie at this point. As such a huge fan of that movie, I do really enjoy and recommend Dr. Sleep very highly. I think it was amazingly done, especially considering how long it's been since the original Stanley Kubrick Shining came out. Mike Flanagan just did an amazing job with this. He handled it with care, and you can tell. I love it. Possession Diaries from 2019, which was watched on Tubi. This was a rewatch for me because of its absurdity, all of the references and jokes that I was making about it. Psycho wanted to see it as well. This movie really cannot be explained. It has to be seen to be believed. I completely understand why Horror Sage's review on Letterboxd, which is actually the reason that I sought out this movie in the first place, references Tommy Wiseau's film The Room, because there is just this very specific quality, or lack thereof, and very clear attempt at effort and seriousness that is completely failing, and it becomes so engaging, and it's sort of like a car wreck you can't look away from. I hate to make that analogy, but it really has to be seen to be believed. It's hard to explain, it's hard to give a rating to, it's hard to recommend or not. Also, quick side note, I was rewatching El Camino, the Breaking Bad movie, because I had just gotten done rewatching the entire Breaking Bad series for the millionth time. There was a busboy in El Camino, and I was like, where do I know that busboy from? It was freaking Possession Diaries. It was a boyfriend from this ridiculous ass movie, and I said, well, obviously this movie got to me and was cemented in my brain enough for me to recognize this guy. I mean, if you see this guy in Possession Diaries, I think you'll understand why he's memorable, but I digress. Let's move on, and let's probably never talk about Possession Diaries again.
So this movie is pretty hilarious. There's a lot of things about it that are just funny. I had a blast watching this. I think it's funny how it starts off with this girl documenting things, and it's supposed to be like a found footage type thing, but then it cuts to random camera shots that aren't found footage, and then it goes back to found footage. It's almost like the filmmakers didn't know what they wanted to do. Do they want to be a traditional film, or do they want to be a found footage movie? I don't think they really knew what they wanted to be, but it was pretty funny. Also, the girl on the poster is not even the girl in the movie, which again, the filmmakers probably have nothing to do with the posters. I know sometimes the way things work in the movie business, when you sell your movie to a distributor of some kind, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes they will create a whole new poster and not even have anything to do with the filmmakers. They make it on their own, and they will release the movie with this new poster that they think will bring in an audience of some kind to watch it. It doesn't have the girl from the movie in it. I mean, at least how hard is it to call her up, have her come out, take a picture? I mean, come on. Anyway, this movie's pretty funny. And again, I would recommend this movie to people who like watching really bad movies, regardless of if it's a horror film or not. If you're into stuff like The Room or anything Neil Breen related, you'll probably get a kick out of this. It's not up there in the Neil Breen category. Neil Breen is in the upper echelon of, I don't even want to say bad movies, because his movies are fantastic. So you know what I mean. If you're into that kind of stuff, you might like this movie, but if you're not, then I do not recommend it. You're probably not going to have a good time.
Murder by Numbers from 2002, which was watched on DVD. Just randomly got the urge to see this again. I'm not sure why. I really love this movie. I'm not sure why. I mean, first of all, Ryan Gosling is one of my favorite actors. I love Sandra Bullock, and I think Michael Pitt is extremely talented as an actor. So the fact that all three of them are in this, and it was before Ryan Gosling blew up and all this stuff, there's just a lot of charm and nostalgia attached to this for me. I know that a lot of it is super ridiculous and over the top, and I wouldn't even necessarily call it a horror film, but I think there's enough true crime, and the idea of teenage killers thinking they can get away with the perfect crime is a scary enough thought for it to classify. But I'm seeing a lot of reviews and ratings that are completely bashing this. So personally, for my taste, I do recommend it, but I don't know about anybody else. I think this is just one of those one-off things where I'm in the minority, and that's okay. But if you like this movie as much as I do, leave me a comment on this video or on our Instagram or on my Letterboxd or something somewhere, because we should probably be pals. The Passenger from 2023, which was watched on Prime. We did talk about this film in one of our trailer videos on the channel here. After having completed it, it didn't necessarily feel like a horror film any longer, but because we had already mentioned it, and there were definitely horrific elements to it, we did want to talk about it anyway. I think after getting hyped up about the trailer, I would not say that I was disappointed. It just turned out to be a lot different than I painted in my head watching the trailer. In a way, that is a compliment, because it's sort of frustrating when trailers give everything about a movie away. As far as a recommendation is concerned, I think that horror fans could enjoy this film if they're into the psychological side of horror. If you're looking for something that is just nonstop gore and madness and things like that, you probably won't get really into this. However, there was a lot of tension and atmosphere the whole time. Sort of like Entrance. It's not nonstop crazy action, but there are some really crazy things that happen, and you're engaged the whole time because it sort of has you on the edge of your seat wondering what's going to go on next. So I do recommend it.
Have said this before in the past, I'm sure, but I think I'm pretty much can say now that I'm a Kyle Gallner fan. He's great in pretty much everything he does. And I will say this, that even in the crappy Nightmare on Elm Street remake from 2010, he was a standout in that. I mean, you could just tell that he had a different caliber than other people in that movie. And it shows, because now here we are with The Passenger. He is great in this movie. Some of the looks and stuff that he gives, like he doesn't even have to say anything half the time. Just the way he stares at other characters and things. It's like, dude, I wouldn't want to mess with this guy. He's crazy. His performance stands out. And also the other actor, Johnny Berchtold, I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. He knocks it out of the park too. They both do a great job in this movie. The opening scene, obviously, in my opinion, is the best scene. I'm not going to give anything away, but it's great. I highly recommend this movie. Go check it out.
Suitable Flesh from 2023, which was watched on Shudder. Here's another film that we spoke of in one of our favorite new horror trailer videos, and I would say this one disappointed me a little bit. Obviously, everyone's going to have their own opinion, but it just got very repetitive to me. I really started wondering how many times we were going to see the same thing occur in the exact same manner. I do think everyone in the film did a great job acting-wise. I think that it was a crazy and cool original idea. There was definitely a lot of hard work and effort put in behind this. I don't want anyone to think I'm saying it's a bad film or that I disliked it. I would still recommend watching it. This is a little bit of a style over substance kind of a thing, which I wouldn't necessarily complain about. A lot of the movie looked really cool. I would definitely recommend it at least for a one-time watch.
I'm a big fan of the movie Mayhem from 2017 that Joe Lynch also directed, that stars Stephen Yeun and Samara Weaving. I think that movie is a masterpiece. And I know I've said it on here before, but go check out that movie. It's f***ing awesome. Knowing that Joe Lynch directed that and then seeing this movie, I was like, fuck yes, bring it on. So here we are. I'm not a huge fan of Heather Graham. Honestly, whenever I hear her name, I immediately just think of Austin Powers and her role in that series. I honestly didn't even realize that Barbara Crampton was even in this movie until the movie started playing. But she's also really great to see. So obviously, when the movie first started, I was like, shit, Barbara Crampton's in this. This is going to be great. I really thought that this was going to be something that once it was over, I was just going to run online and see if I could buy a Blu-ray copy of it, something, and own this movie, because there's no way this couldn't be great. I don't know. Honestly, I was a little disappointed. I feel like some of the camera shots were a little weird, the cinematography, so to speak. I will say this, though. There is a scene in the movie that is a really gory scene. I'm not going to give anything away, but when you see it, you'll say, oh, this is the scene that he was talking about. But it's a really gory scene, and I think they did a really great job with the practical effects in that scene. So kudos to them. The movie had, in my opinion, a lot of unnecessary CGI effects. When you hear CGI, you think of something ridiculous like a Marvel movie or a Transformer or something like that, but you don't think a random shot of a hand. You don't think of random stuff like that. So there were some random shots that was clearly CGI. We both were just like, why? What is the point of these CGI shots? But the CGI didn't look good and it stood out. But it seemed like it was just unnecessary. Like, why do you need a CGI hand? Why can't you just use the actor's hand? It wasn't doing anything crazy. And even if it was doing it crazy, why couldn't you just use practical effects? You had practical effects for the gory scene I mentioned before. But I digress. I was just a little disappointed in this movie is all. And I really wanted to like this. Maybe in a few years, we'll revisit it and I'll watch it again and maybe I'll have a different outlook on it. But for now, I'm just kind of right in the middle with it. I would recommend it though. It was better than most things that I've seen lately, to be honest with you. But it's, in my opinion, it's just not the best.
Torn Hearts from 2022, which was watched on Prime. I remember getting really excited about this movie when I first saw the trailer because I consider myself a fan of Katie Sagal. I used to watch Married with Children back in the day when it was still airing on television. Once I got older and saw her on Sons of Anarchy, I was like, dude, she is a fucking badass. I think she's so cool. This movie was directed by Brea Grant, who I also really like and think is freaking cool, so I was excited about it. I wouldn't say that this was necessarily a letdown. I mean, I'm going into it like, okay, it's modern pop country mixed with horror. I'm not into that music scene at all, and it was such a huge part of the film. It took a lot of little fun twists and turns. It looked amazing, and Katie Sagal was wonderful. I think she did such a good job. This is definitely very campy and is not to be taken too seriously. I don't know if it was just because of the bond between Katie Sagal and her sister, or how pink, bright, and girly the house was, and how everything was just focused around all of these women in the country music industry, but it felt like a very girly movie to me. I feel like this is the filmic equivalent of a fruity pink girly drink. If you would be interested in something like that, I do recommend it. I'm glad I watched it. It was a really fun movie. As always, we thank you so much for watching. Leave us a comment if you have any horror movie recommendations and we will add them to our watch list. Until next time.